All week long, we've been discussing how U.S. Treasury officials are seeking to ban U.S. persons from using Tornado Cash, a popular crypto mixer used to obfuscate crypto transactions. Galaxy Digital has published a report of the issues and implications behind this ban. Joining us now with more is Galaxy Digital Head of Research, Alex Thorn. Alex, great to have you on. So maybe we can start off with, what's the history of OFAC and their sanctions and their relation to cryptocurrencies?
Yeah. Hey, Christine, thanks for being here. OFAC has issued sanctions, added entities or individuals that are involved in cryptocurrencies in some way, including actual addresses belonging to individuals at least 13 times prior to OFAC's action on Monday, August 8th, right, where they added Tornado Cash. I think the interesting thing here in terms of adding Tornado Cash is that unlike prior editions of which always involved entities or individuals, right? So businesses, they did a prior mixer, blender.io, but also plenty of individuals and addresses thought to belong to them. Unlike those prior times, this time OFAC has sanctioned software, right? They've sanctioned 38 smart contracts affiliated and associated with Tornado Cash, the decentralized application. That's the first time I'm aware of where a smart contract or any type of software has been sanctioned by OFAC.
And what about the total value locked on Tornado Cash and how this will impact the rest of the crypto market, especially DeFi?
Yeah, I mean, at the time of the sanctions being enacted, there was about $450 million worth of liquidity in Tornado Cash pools. That was on Ethereum. There's, Tornado Cash has been replicated across several other chains, right? Optimism, Arbitrum, XDAI, AVAX, BSC. Those have very small amounts of liquidity, maybe like $1 million total worth of value. But on Ethereum, the vast majority of that liquidity is ETH, right? So I think something like 85% of the value locked there is wrapped ETH, right? So I think the clear implication for assets in Tornado Cash is that they immediately become tainted. Sort of impossible for any regulated entity to interact with. Certainly, any U.S. person that interacts now with these addresses, the 38 smart contract addresses that are affiliated with Tornado Cash, potentially opens themselves to liability for violating U.S. sanctions on these addresses. So that includes withdrawing these funds. And no doubt the chain analysis companies are going to be helping regulated entities like exchanges to track and identify when assets that appear on their platforms have derived from these addresses, these pools on Tornado Cash. So I think overall, in terms of DeFi, impact on DeFi trading and liquidity, it's relatively minimal. I mean, $450 million worth of tokens, mostly ETH, isn't huge when you look at like the daily float and trade volumes of these assets. The other implications I think we're going to talk about are significantly bigger.
I also wanted to get into, I know Ethereum makes up a majority of what's on Tornado Cash. What about Bitcoin?
Yeah, there's a small amount of wrapped Bitcoin, about $5 million in there. I think it was about 220 WBTC. It's not huge, but impactful nonetheless. I think the real questions center around the ability of DeFi generally that relies on these off-chain wrapped assets like wrapped Bitcoin, but also stablecoins like USDC. I think that's really at the core of the question. If they can be frozen for whatever reason, in this case, right, due to OFAC sanctions, but say due to some other law, right? We know lawmakers are looking at regulating and creating a framework for a regulated digital dollar. If that framework were to ultimately include things like restrictions on the transferability of stablecoins between non-whitelisted addresses, that would have wide-ranging implications across DeFi, and we know that USDC has that capability, right, to be frozen. And I think that's where the community in general on Ethereum and in DeFi more broadly is becoming a bit concerned, frankly, because so much of DeFi relies on these sort of off-chain liability tokens. And we do see coming down the pike a framework that could very well include that type of restriction.
Wow, we did speak to MakerDAO founder Rune Christian about this earlier, that there could be this contagion effect, with USDC, then DAI as well. Maybe you can go into some of that stablecoin vulnerability that this exposes.
Yeah, so a lot of people have known about this vulnerability, to be clear, right? And had been critical of MakerDAO as the example, right? MakerDAO, I think something like 2/3 of circulating DAI issued by the MakerDAO protocol is actually collateralized by USDC. And merely the fact that that Circle, can freeze those tokens, blacklist them, make them unusable, that's the issue. And it's the issue for wide swaths of DeFi, whether Uniswap pools that trade against USDC or lending protocols like Aave and Compound, or MakerDAO, right, which relies on USDC as a collateral type in order for DAI to hold its peg. If for any reason, say a government agency that oversees or can address Circle tells them, hey, you know what? We already said, OFAC said Tornado Cash was, sanctioned and illegal. But for this other reason, we now say MakerDAO is sanctioned and illegal, right? Or any reason, right? The fact that they can then react the way they did for Tornado Cash with MakerDAO would significantly harm DAI. It represents a major vulnerability for decentralized stablecoins. By the way, the two largest are DAI and Frax. DAI is more than 2/3 collateralized by USDC. Frax is over 90% collateralized by USDC. So this has knock-on effects even from the centralized stablecoins to the decentralized stablecoins. But it also just widely, these stablecoins are widely used as the base trading asset all across DeFi, right? And if there is any kind of broad sweeping capability, right, you don't need a foreign hacker group that works at the behest of one of America's enemies to interact with your protocol in order to brick it in the way that we saw with Tornado Cash. All you need is for the U.S. Congress to pass a law that regulates U.S. stablecoin issuers and designates that a specific regulator, and then for that regulator to say you can no longer allow your tokens to move between non-whitelisted wallets, right? Which we view as a very, very likely possibility over the next 6 to 18 months. So that is the vulnerability that MakerDAO is, as a decentralized protocol, exposed to due to their reliance on USDC. But again, this has huge implications across all of DeFi if we start to see something like that come forward more broadly on stablecoin issuers.
And finally, what kind of policy questions does this raise about, privacy over the internet? Does the United States want to track all of your transactions? You can't do that with money usually, but you can track Bitcoin.
Privacy is not illegal, right? It's not illegal. In fact, obfuscating the origin of funds is not even money laundering. For it to be money laundering, it requires that the funds themselves be derived from illicit activity, right? Vitalik Buterin publicly stated that he used Tornado Cash in order to donate to Ukraine. That's not illicit activity, but that used the Tornado Cash protocol. I think without privacy in general, in DeFi, but also in general, these protocols become very difficult to use for a lot of real world and impactful things. If I pay you, Christine, for lunch, let's say you bought me lunch, I don't want to show you my entire financial history just to send you $15, right? We need privacy. I think also when you think about stablecoins broadly, you look at the Chinese digital yuan as sort of the archetypal surveillance type of state-issued money. And if we do codify a digital dollar, whether issued by the central bank or merely sort of regulated a privately issued one, it should be feature competitive, right, with whomever it is we're trying to compete with. If you're trying to compete with offshore algorithmic stablecoins, it should be transferable like they are, but with better collateral and reserve requirements and transparency. If you're trying to compete with China's digital yuan, which is highly surveilled and freezable and controllable, then ours should have features that are have American values in them, right, and promote freedom. I think that's one of the ways that one of the things that it raises is this question about privacy and control over digital money. And then the other question is, how does OFAC actually have the authority here to regulate or apply sanctions to Tornado Cash? They can place sanctions on individuals or entities that are foreign to the United States and that represent some kind of national security threat or foreign policy objective, right, to apply sanctions. Well, there is no individual associated with Tornado Cash listed in OFAC's SDN list. They don't list a person's name or an address, which is what they do, right? This merely says Tornado Cash. And it's not a typical business. It's not like Blender.io, which was located in a place, I forget the actual address, but you go look up the SDN list, it shows addresses, people associated with it. This just says Tornado Cash at these Ethereum addresses. So people are asking exactly what the rationale was, and people in Washington are going to be asking as well.